Just as promised, I have 20 books which are recommendations that fit the white supremacy prompt. I would state from the onset that based on the present situation and the present state of affairs, I am certain nobody will be able to state that there is no need to tear down the institution that is white supremacy. I am fairly certain that we can all unanimously agree that there has been a subjugation and an harassment and an attempt at an alienation, that is fueled by white supremacy ideals. So yeah, here are 20 book recommendations for that. I'm going to kick things off with the very first book, What Comes Naturally, Miscegenation Laws and the Making of Race in America by Peggy Pascoe. In the late 19th century, early 20th century, miscegenation laws were passed in the United States. Now, for those of you that are wondering what are miscegenation laws, they are laws that ban interracial marriage and sex, usually, often, at least in the case of the United States, between white folks and other races. I consider it a further entrenchment of white supremacist values because they don't want their pure white blood tainted by other races. In her book, Peggy Pascoe traces the origins of miscegenation laws in the states, its spread, and its ultimate demise in 1967 with the Loving versus Virginia ruling, which declared miscegenation laws as being unconstitutional. But yes, you heard that right, 1967. That's like what, 53 years ago? Yes, 1967. And she takes it further with the convenient colorblindness that arose after the ruling and became the mainstay conversational diversion tactic after that. So the next time someone tells you, I don't see color, please refer them to that book. Let them get enlightened. You shouldn't have to put in all that work yourself. The second book on the list is The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness by Michelle Alexander. When you realize that black men constitute about 3 times the population of inmates in the US prison as opposed to their white counterparts, and you realize that the rights of felons who have left prison are severely curtailed upon their release, which means they're excluded from public housing, welfare, employment opportunities, and in certain cases are not even allowed to vote, then you understand how the white system further attempts to turn a significant number of the black population into an underclass, stripped of basic freedoms that a majority of the system, the white system, enjoys. And when Michelle Alexander explains that the mass incarceration of black people wasn't actually in response to the crack epidemic of the 80s. After all, Reagan's war on drugs kicked in 2 years before cocaine became any form of a problem. And she follows this thread by pointing out that the mass incarcerations were actually in itself a direct response to the civil rights gains that black folks gained in the 60s and 70s, and that law and order is actually code for a form of racial control. Then you start to see how the system has been set up to further dehumanize black folks, particularly black men, whilst maintaining the civility of a facade that is built around the attempt to fight crime. And then there's The Injustice Never Leaves You, Anti-Mexican Violence in Texas by Monica Muñoz Martinez, who explores vigilantism that was basically state-sponsored between 1910 and 1920, whereby vigilante groups and law enforcement, hello Texas Rangers, killed Mexican residents in Texas with impunity. They did the worst. Hanging, shooting, burning, beating ethnic Mexicans to death, whilst operating with the knowledge that because they live in the outskirts of Texas and in certain remote areas that they could get away with it, and they did get away with it, also because the states did find a way to approve of those acts. Monica Martinez confronts the white supremacist ideals that made this happen, and just how the state of Texas that is, attempted to cleanse itself of its atrocities and change the narrative. Even though in certain parts of the state, in certain diners in the state, she said she's walked in and seen the owners proudly display the legacy of those times, the atrocious acts that were committed. They had images of it framed and hung in their diners, whilst also supporting the Texas Rangers. It's a reckoning of a decade of murder along racial divides that so many people are not aware of, and those that are aware of are trying to act like it never happened. And then there's stamped from the beginning, a definitive history of racist ideas in America by Ibram X. Kendi. Cotton Mather believed that black people were inferior to whites in all areas except for our physical strength. Jefferson believed that blacks weren't necessarily inferior to whites. It's just that some of black folks were more enlightened than the others, and even the enlightened ones needed whites' wisdom and guidance in order to live fruitful, productive, successful, happy lives. Washington believed, on the other hand, that the time wasn't right to free the slaves, whilst William Lloyd Garrison believed that black people shouldn't be slaves, but that we were socially inferior to the whites. And so why on earth would anybody give our black asses the right to vote? Yeah. And then there was Lincoln, who wanted black slaves to be free, but so they could ship them to Africa. I am guessing there was no plan in Lincoln's belief/thoughts with regards to giving the black slaves and their families adequate compensation for the centuries of forced labor and servitude that, they had offered the states. It was just going to ship them to Africa with nothing but the clothes on their backs, even though, in Britain, they paid slave owners compensation for losing slaves, like for slaves being set free, for black slaves being given, their freedom. They paid slave owners. I know. W.E. Du Bois believed that the educated black man was equal to the white man. Yes. He didn't think the same for the uneducated black man, but the educated black man he believed was equal to the white. And Angela Davis, on the other hand, believed that black people, especially black women, are in every way equal to white people, if only we're given the same opportunities. Now, what Ibram Kendi set out to do and successfully achieve with his book is to show us the history of the rhetoric, the thoughts, and the ideas that have shaped America and its relation and perception of black people over centuries, and how and why they were created to defend deeply entrenched discriminatory policies and to help the country rationalize the racial inequalities present in the system. And then there's medical apartheid, the dark history of medical experimentation on black Americans from colonial times to the present by Harriet A. Washington. In 1932, 400 men were infected with syphilis and left untreated for 40 years. Yes, you heard that right, 40 years. And the reason why they were left untreated for 40 years was so that government officials could study the course of the disease, with the live test subjects. Known as the Tuskegee syphilis study, this inhumane and medically abusive act didn't come to an end until 1972, when a reporter finally stumbled on it and made it publicly known. And the public outcry had them shut down the study, but at this point in time, 100 of those 400 men were already dead from syphilis. And this is just one of the many instances of America's use of African Americans as their unwilling, unwitting test subjects, medical test subjects, that Harriet Washington covers in her book. One of many. Another case in point, the Mississippi appendectomy. I'm going to just leave you to Google that and see for yourself, what that was about. Just Google it. It was that famous that it became known as the Mississippi appendectomy. So you should just Google it. Now, brace yourself, because this book is triggering. Goddamn, it's triggering as fuck. But it's a needed book to read and study, because it shows decades, centuries of othering that has been used to justify the most inhumane medical practice, turning Black people into guinea pigs for science. Now, a lot of times when we think about white supremacy ideals and the institutional racism that has been put in place, we tend to think of America. That is not the case, or rather, they are not the sole case. And Inside Babylon, the Caribbean Diaspora in Britain, which was edited by Winston James and Clive Harris, shows us that, as it examines exactly how employers and the police and psychiatrists and welfare system have spent decades pushing Afro-Caribbean people into occupational ghettos. It covers the treatment of Black women within the communities, the racist formation of media and state with regards the Notting Hill Carnival, and so much more. And still speaking of white supremacy in Britain, there is Black and British, A Forgotten History by David Olusoga. Now, the white supremacist narrative and positioning has always been, go back to where you're from, when they're addressing non-white people, but particularly Black Britons. And David Olusoga's Black and British shows just how systematically Black Britons have been erased from British history, which in itself is also very racist. And to correct that, David Olusoga chronicles the lives of Black Britons from the early Roman era to Black Tudors, Georgians, Victorians, all the way to present day. Because there is no better way to fight a system that seeks to erase your existence and the existence of your people than by showing the many Black people who have lived and fought and survived and thrived in Britain. Now, the next two books I'm going to talk about are connected to a very important body read that is currently happening, or rather that will be taking place between June 5th and June 19th. Yes, it's meant to coincide with Juneteenth, which, celebrate the final emancipation of the last of the Black slaves who were finally given their freedom. So between June 5th and June 19th, which is 2 weeks, we would be reading two books that are central to this conversation that is currently being had. I would like to state that please participate in the Blackout Body Read. I'm going to be participating. I would love to see you there. I'm going to draw books with Shay, because Shay is amazing, and just putting it together to have us, reading together and having these conversations at this time is very crucial. So I'm going to leave the link to her video down in the description bar below. Please check it out so you can get more information. But yes, it's important, like, follow all the social medias, go to the website, just get the books, prepare, and let's have this conversation. Okay, so the very first book is White Rage, The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide by Carol Anderson, which helps to shed light on the white supremacists lashing out at the gains that Black folks have gained in America. So the Civil War was won. White Rage followed it up with Jim Crow laws. So Brown versus Board of Education, which declared the racial segregation in public schools as being unconstitutional, was passed. White rage followed it up by shutting down schools whilst funding private white schools. Black people successfully fought for the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. White rage immediately followed it up with, here is a war on drugs and mass incarceration to combat that. What Carol Anderson gives us is a detailed unveiling of a system that has been consistently and systematically injuring the progress of Black people in America. Now, the second book is White Fragility: Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism by Robin DiAngelo, whereby Robin talks about the defensive moves that white people employ when they are challenged. The tears, the rage, the guilt, the silence, and how these behaviors help to further perpetuate and protect racial inequality. Case in point, the bullshit a white booktuber spewed a couple of days ago, about how she's trying so hard and she's so sad and she's so worried about how she has to be careful about what she has to say so that she does not offend people, and how everyone is reacting with rage and hatred and accusations, when she actually means people calling and demanding accountability from others. Something like that. But yeah, please, if you can join the Blackout Body Read, please do. We cannot wait to have you. Recommendation on my list is The Possessive Investment in Whiteness: How White People Profit from Identity Politics by George Lipsitz, which examines the fact that public policy and private prejudice work together to create a possessive investment in whiteness, which in turn is responsible for the racialized hierarchies of the American society. In other words, there is quite the benefit to the white system in maintaining the racial inequalities it has dealt and is still dealing to Black folks in America, from residential segregation to the discrimination by the FHA in regards to federal loans, aka yes, Black folks are less likely to get the loans and the specific amounts requested as opposed to white people, to the concentration of toxic waste in Black communities, to the mass incarceration of Black folks. It also further looks at the connection between white masculinity and wars, and basically the fact that white America is encouraged to invest in whiteness, to remain true to an identity that provides them with resources, with power and opportunities. It's an understanding of the supremacist system and why white people are consciously and subconsciously invested in having it stay the way it is. And then there's Rise of the Warrior Cop: The Militarization of America's Police Force by Bradley Balco. Now, I'm certain that with the present state of affairs, nobody is surprised at a book with a title like this making it to the list. After all, the militarized cop is the tool of the nationalist state and one that is obsessed with keeping its white supremacist ideals, which is currently what America is dealing with. Now, this book takes us on a journey of reckless government programs and policies that have led to the blurring of the lines between cop and soldier, melding them to become the force of tyranny and terror that we recognize and see today. And by that I mean, for example, the funding for the police force that is always consistently getting increased, the program that was put in place that allowed the Defense Department to transfer their excess military equipment and gear to police departments spread across the country. Yes, it's scary, especially when you realize that the police sees itself as soldiers and enforcers of the law against those that they consider and view as other, which, when you think about it, further explains the current situation and what it is that we are all witnessing right now. Then there is Me and White Supremacy: Combat Racism, Change the World, Become a Good Ancestor by Layla F. Saad. If I got paid $1 for every time I have seen a well-meaning tweet from white people reaching out to Black people during this time, asking how they can, what they can do to unlearn some of the racist ideas and ideals and behaviors that they have been exhibiting, I would be as rich as Aliko Dangote, who, by the way, is the is a Nigerian man who is the richest man in Africa. Aliko Dangote's got money. So I would be as rich as Aliko Dangote. So, so rather than asking people who are currently dealing with centuries of trauma and racism and are currently dealing with the present situation, rather than putting that added burden on them for them to try and help you reach the better version of yourself, I would refer you to this book, which is more like a workbook, a 28-day guide to dismantling the racist system by doing your part and looking inward, you know, with questions like, am I a racist? What is racism? How have I internalized it and embodied it in my day-to-day actions, etc., etc.? What is my relationship with white supremacy? You know, etc., etc. It's a book that requires honesty, self-reflection, and taking the time to do the work, rather than attempting to heap all that work on the shoulders and psyche of people who shouldn't have to take on the burden of educating you on these situations. I'm sorry, this is, yeah, that is tough love for you, because you have to put in the work yourself. And if it is that you're participating in the FuckAthon, if it is that you saw this video and clicked on it, this recommendation video, and clicked on it, then I'm assuming that you are ready and willing to put in the work, and this book just might be right up your alley. Next is Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, which is, think of it as a diary, a personal diary that Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote for his son and to us as well, about race in America, starting from the days of slavery to the present day, all in order to explain the present situation in America with regards its treatment of its black citizens. It shows us why fear is a driving force within black people, the fear of inhabiting one's body, of stepping out as a black person, because the system sees your body, your identity, yourself as a threat. It talks about identity, it talks about race being a social construct, and the fact that the great America dream is nothing but a facade built on the backs of slavery, white supremacy, and police brutality. Next is Racism and Discourse in Latin America, which was edited by Tune Evan Dijik. I don't know how to pronounce the name, apologies. Please, I'm sorry, but also at the same time, a lot of y'all can't even pronounce a lot of Nigerian names, so I'm sorry, but Dijik. I searched, but I can't get the pronunciation. Anyway, this book explores exactly how public discourse contributes to and promotes racism in Latin America, especially with regards prejudice specifically against the indigenous people and Latin Americans of African descent, all the while exploring the wealth disparity despite the progress, the formal progress of minorities in Latin America in the last decades. I think that books that also explore white supremacist ideals and how it's been established in other countries other than, you know, the United States, the United Kingdom, it's way more widespread than that, and that's the reason why this book is on this list. Next is The Good Immigrants, 26 Writers Reflect on America, which was edited by Niklesh Shukla. Now, one of the rhetorics that white supremacists like to push is the belief that immigrants are there to take over their lives and take away their jobs, and the fact that their numbers are dwindling because, you know, immigrants are coming to their countries, etc., etc., and are pushing them out. Like, that's the narrative that they're always pushing, which we all know is bullshit. We know it's total and completely bullshit. But anyway, the one group of people that they always turn to are immigrants, right? So it only makes sense to add this collection of immigrant stories that is written by various immigrant writers to this list, you know, from Nicole Dennis Benn to Teju Cole to Rahawa Hale, you know, etc., etc. Now, in this book, we see how one writer is consistently pigeonholed and boxed as being that Iranian American writer, and is consistently pushed to have those, to tell those stories, to tell only those stories. We see the extent of the ordering of her identity and what it means to her. Another writer talks about her father's desperate desire to be assimilated within the system, and how uphill the battle of that acceptance is being for him. And then another writer talks about the cultural appropriation of Cheongsams by white people living in the suburbs of where, you know, she lives, while finding a way to discriminate against her for her Chinese heritage. Now, I've put in a lot of non-fiction books, 15 in total. If you add the 10 from the Fuck Racism video that I did last year, which is going to be in the description bar, you have quite a number to pull from. And the reason why we're focusing on non-fiction is because there's this understanding that a lot of people find it easy for themselves to disconnect from the present situation when they're looking at this character through the lens of fiction. So non-fiction forces you to sit up to realize that these are real people and these are real stories and these are real things that have happened. So as much as it is that, you know, you connect with Star in The Hate You Give, it's important for you to see real life accounts and stories as well in non-fiction work. And it's the reason why this video is populated with a lot of non-fiction work. But now we're moving on to the fiction part of the video, the last 5 books, starting with Arrow of God by Chinua Achebe. Now, white supremacy has always used religion as a way of justifying the othering of people who aren't white and who do not subscribe to the notion of the Christian God. And for anyone who has read and who has experienced and who is reaping the effect of the colonization of Africa, you know just how central religion was to the colonization of the continent, because, you know, they came first as missionaries, then they came as traders, and then the story just kind of escalated from there. Now, as missionaries, what they preached was the ungodly nature of the traditional practices and religion that they met in these areas. And Ezelu, who is the lead character in Chinua Achebe's Arrow of God, is the chief priest of Ulu, who is worshipped in 6 villages. He is a man accustomed to the power, and just like Okonkwo's journey in Things Fall Apart, we witness Ezelu's downfall and the downfall of his religion against the backdrop of colonialism and white religious assimilation. Now, Arrow of God is my favorite Achebe book, closely followed by Man of the People, but I really did love Arrow of God. There's a character in there that just, she owns my heart, but anyway, that's it. The next book on the list is FES Death by Nnedi Okorafor. Now, if it is that you've read this book, I'm fairly certain that you will not be surprised that it made it to this list. After all, the whole premise of the book, or rather what kicks off the book itself, is Onyesuonwu's father, who is coded as white, whose race is heavily militarized and is obsessed with the oppression and subjugation and violation of the darker skinned race, and who delight in the raping of the black women that they discover in their raids. One of these black women being Onyesuonwu's mother, which was how Onyesuonwu was conceived. She's a child born of rape. And this book follows Onyesuonwu's journey to learn and master a power so that she can eventually take on her father. Now, I love this book, absolutely love it. So of course it's going to make the list. Of course it made the list. Then there's Knots and Crosses by Mallory Blackman, which tells a story of how assumptions can be deadly and is set across racial lines, bound together by a love story between the white knot Callum and the black cross Sefi. The white knots in this case, aka Callum, are the second-class citizens, and then you have the black cross, Sefi in particular, being part of the ruling class, and they both fall in love. So it's a Romeo and Juliet themed story set along racial line. Them falling in love is a taboo, and when Sefi and her mother are almost killed by the liberation militia that is linked to Callum's father, technically all hell breaks loose. Then there is Harbaugh Me by Jacqueline Woodson, which tells us about the healing that can be found when teenagers share their feelings and their thoughts in a safe space, a harbor, if you will. In this case, is a weekly chat room without any teachers or any adult supervision that they've named ARTT, a room to talk. And talk is what they do. They talk about Esteban's father's deportation. They talk about the incarceration of Ailey's father, Mary's own fear of racial profiling, and how Ashton is dealing with the change in his family's financial situation. All in all, it becomes a safe space where they can talk and learn and grow, and that is part of the human experience, isn't it? And then finally, the last book on the list is I Am Enough by Grace Byers, which is illustrated by Ketura A. Bobo, which is a picture book that parents can read to their kids. And I think it's an excellent way to start conversation in the family about how we are all the same internally, even though we might look a bit different externally. And as such, we should show love to ourselves and to one another, and we should be kind to one another. And I think a picture book like this is important because children aren't born racist. They are not born having this white supremacist ideals already stuck in their heads. No, they are taught, if not by their family or their parents, by like their friends, their peers, people they meet outside of their homes. So it's important to have these conversations with them early enough, whilst they are ideating and coming up with the belief system that would guide them as they grow older, so that they don't get swayed by racist ideas and racist rhetoric, because you left that part of their education to others because you thought for some reason that they were too young to have that conversation, or that, oh, you feel uncomfortable having that conversation, which if you feel uncomfortable, you should check yourself, because and if you think that they are too young, like they are not too young to learn these things. This is what is happening in the world around them. And children of color, particularly black children and children with disabilities, they don't have the luxury of staying kids and being aware of the situation. So I think it's your responsibility as a parent to start having these conversations early, so that your children can start being able to reason and think on their own without, you know, subscribing to the ideals of what they hear around them. So yeah, those are 20 book recommendations for the Fuck White Supremacy prompt for the FuckAthon. For those that do not know, the FuckAthon is a readathon I'm hosting in July, that kicks off July 1st to July 31st. I'm going to leave the announcement video down in the description bar and a list of the prompts as well. I hope you can participate, and I hope you're down to having these conversations. Let me know what are some of your recommendations, because I am putting together the Google Docs for that would basically have all the info with the book recommendations and the ones that can actually meet multiple prompts, because I forgot to mention during my announcement videos that you can't combine prompts. So if you find a book that like fits like 4 prompts, go for it. I don't mind. Yeah, that is the video. If you liked it, please do not forget to give it a big thumbs up. Also share it so that other people can also be aware of these books and these resources that are available for them to read, to know, to do better, to be more knowledgeable about the situation. So please share this video. If you're not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe, and please click on that notification bell so you can know the minute I have a new video go up. I make new videos every Wednesdays and Saturdays, and I would, hey baby, Compop wants to say hi. So here he is. Look at him. Hey baby. See? I make new videos every Wednesdays and Saturdays, and I'll see you soon. Until then, stay passionate, love books, love yourself. Bye.